a dizzy patient. What typically happens all over the world is the dizzy patient is, or as it is, he's feeling dizzy and then he's taken for a ride. What do I mean by taken for a ride? The patient comes and tells you, I'm feeling dizzy, मुझे चक्कर आता है, मला चक्कर रहती है. And what do? You examine him into brackets. You ask for an X-ray, cervical spine, and then when he comes back with the report of spondylosis, you put on a very intelligent looking face. See, I told you. Sometimes you have a inconvenient radiologist, somebody new, and he gives a normal X-ray cervical spine report. Then you have a problem. Then you go back and check the patient's BP. If the BP is low, you say, I think your dizziness is due to low BP. If the BP is high, then you say, I think it is high BP. If again it is inconvenient and the BP is also normal, then what do? Then you go to the patient's age. If he's old, you're good. You can say, I think it's vertebrobasilar insufficiency. And if he's young, then you are driven to the wall. So we have the good old favorite. You say, there's something wrong in your inner ear fluid. Finally, what do? Give the patient drugs. You call it, it's vertigo, and give drugs. So what have you done? You have just translated. Patient said, mujhe chakkar aata hai, and you called it vertigo. He's saying, I'm feeling dizzy, you call it vertigo. Often this is not vertigo, but still you call it. Secondly, you must remember that by saying it is vertigo, you're not making a diagnosis, you're only translating. So we want to try and make a diagnosis. Now, first of all, what is vertigo? It's been used for a big variety of sensations, but now the Barani Society has come out with a definition. There has to be a false sensation of movement. If the patient does not have a false sensation of movement, then it is not vertigo. Typically, it is spinning, but not always. And we'll see sometimes now that a patient may have a non-spinning vertigo. Now, this is going to be a question for you. Is this dog having vertigo or not? And the question is, I'm going to come on the screen. So start the question, which is the wrong answer? Yes, it is vertigo. No, it is not vertigo. Third, dogs cannot get vertigo. And we call the SPCA for cruelty to animals. Which is the wrong answer out of these four? Click on the wrong answer. Remember, you cannot click on your laptops. It doesn't work on the laptop or PC. Only those who have a phone can vote. Unfortunately, Zoom has not got this feature yet. And we have written to them that they should allow voting in the laptop also, but you cannot. Nobody's voting. Nobody's on the phone, I think. Okay, so we'll end the poll and we'll go back to our share screen. So the answer is, it is not vertigo because it's not a false sensation of movement. The dog is actually spinning. Dogs don't feel dizzy also is wrong, because there are some patients, people who have done a cruel video, they turn this dog round and round. When the dog stops turning on that table, he is going to feel dizzy because his inner ear fluid is going to keep spinning, and then he will get a false sensation of movement. So dogs do feel dizzy. He will when he stops turning, and call the SPCA, that was also right. So the correct answer is, the wrong answer was which one? Yes, it is vertigo is wrong. Okay. So there are types of non-spinning vertigo also. Vertigo is not always spinning. So you can get this where the patient is just feeling a sort of swaying sensation, or sometimes they just feel they're tilted to one side. That is also non-spinning vertigo. They can sometimes feel they're sliding somewhere. Or some people just feel this sort of bobbing sensation, like Malda debarkment, as if you are on a boat. They feel you're just going up and down. All this is non-spinning vertigo. It can be swaying back, forth, right to left, anything. When a person only has a feeling of disturbed or impaired spatial orientation, that is called dizziness. And when you add false sensation of motion to that, then it becomes vertigo. So there is a difference between only dizziness and vertigo. What is not vertigo? Why have I put all these here? Because many patients call this also dizziness, this also chakkar. So when the person feels he's going to faint and pass out, he calls it chakkar. When he's feeling I cannot think clearly, or I cannot do things when I'm looking at the computer for a long time, that is also called chakkar. That is disordered thinking. Detachment from reality is also called dizziness. And just sometimes non-specific malaise or weakness, your mother-in-law walks in, the daughter-in-law feels dizzy. That is not vertigo. So we have the old Drachman heart classification. It is quite useful still. You try to divide the patient who says I'm feeling dizzy into, is it vertigo, is it pre-syncope, is it imbalance, or is it lightheadedness? So this is useful, but there are a lot of overlaps and sometimes you may not get. So type 1, that is true vertigo. It can be spinning or non-spinning, but there is a feeling of movement. And then there are typically precipitants. So true vertigo will happen when you lie down, when you turn in bed, when you move your head, you do something and then you get. This is true vertigo. And second one, where you only feel faintness before the eyes, you feel you might pass out. This is typically a cardiovascular condition. And this typically will happen when you are sitting for a long time or lying down and get up suddenly, or when you stand for a long time. So typically this is pre-syncope, and the causes are postural hypotension, sometimes cardiac problems, vasovagal attacks, low cardiac output, etc. But most commonly postural hypotension. So you must check the BP standing and lying down in a person who complains of dizziness on standing up. Remember, the patient does not say I am feeling faintness before the eyes. He doesn't say I've got pre-syncope. He says मुझे चक्कर आता है. कब आता है? When I stand up or when I'm standing for a long time. That is the clue. The third one is again chakkar, again dizziness. But what are these patients? They are not having spinning. They are not feeling faint. They are feeling unsteady when walking. But they also describe it as dizziness. So the person is feeling imbalance. Typically, it will happen only when standing or walking. If somebody says, I'm feeling imbalance when sitting, very likely it's psychogenic. And this will be aggravated when you are walking on uneven ground or it is dark. Here we have all the neurological causes, starting right from the head to the toe. So gait apraxia, extrapyramidal disorders like Parkinson's often present with unsteadiness, and they call it dizziness and are given Stemetil. So you can understand what happens. Cerebellar disorders, myelopathy. Myelopathy is one condition where cervical spondylosis can cause dizziness. Otherwise, most of the time when cervical spine is blamed for dizziness, it is wrong. Neuropathy. I've seen n number of diabetic neuropathies where the person loses sensation in the leg, starts feeling imbalance when walking, particularly in the dark, but is given anti-vertigo drugs. Bilateral vestibulopathy we'll see later in another talk. It's a common cause of impairment of balance. It does not come with vertigo. In bilateral vestibulopathy, you do not get vertigo. You may not get nausea, vomiting, anything. You just feel unsteady while walking. And in the elderly, often it is multisensory. There's loss of vision, there's loss of balance, there's loss of position sense due to mild neuropathy, everything is there. Type 4 is where the description is vague, numb or heaviness or lightheadedness. It's some abnormal sensation which you can't fit into the earlier 3 types. But remember the caveat, the patient does not often describe properly. Somebody may be having vertigo, but he calls it numbness. He doesn't describe it properly. He doesn't explain that it happens only when turning or lying down. So you must still rule out the first 3 before you call it psychogenic. This is an approach by David Newman Toker. He calls it the titrate approach. Titrate stands for timing, triggers, and targeted examination. So let us briefly see what it is. Vertigo is a complicated thing, and to approach vertigo, we have to try different approaches. So the one approach was the history, what I told you. Is it vertigo, true vertigo? Is it faintness before the eyes? Is it imbalance, or is it some non-specific sensation? The second one, yes, day before we heard Miriam talk to us about the 4 syndromes. Is it acute? Is it recurrent positional? Is it recurrent non-positional? Or is it just imbalance? So these 4 syndromes. So here, there's another way of looking at it. So you look at it whatever way you want, whichever way makes you feel comfortable. The causes are same 6 or 7 causes. You have to try and find out which one it is. So let us see what is the titrate approach. You try to see, is the vertigo, is the attack episodic or is it continuous? If it is episodic, is it triggered by something or is it spontaneous? Does it happen on its own? You are listening to a talk and suddenly everything starts spinning. Be careful, either it is migraine or you may be having a TIA. But if it is triggered when you lie down, when you turn in bed, when something else happens, when you are standing, lying down for a long time and suddenly stand up and you feel vertigo, it could be postural hypotension. So triggered is different than spontaneous. And the second one is continuous. When the person has continuous sensation, then you see, is there some inciting event or is it spontaneous? These articles are available on the net, and if anybody wants them, you can get them. Look for the titrate approach by David Newman Toker. So as I said, it is episodic or continuous, triggered or spontaneous. So the triggered ones, what are the triggers? It can be the Dix-Hallpike maneuver, lying down, turning in bed, or it can be postural hypotension. So when you suddenly stand up. And the spontaneous ones, you have to think, is there progressive hearing loss? Does the person have headaches? Then it's probably migraine. If there's progressive hearing loss, it's probably Meniere's. Does the person who's complaining of continuous dizziness have psychiatric symptoms? It could be psychogenic. And does the patient have some of the dangerous Ds? So diplopia, dysarthria, dysphagia, anything, then it could actually be a posterior fossa stroke. You look at the inciting events. So if there is trauma, toxin, or a drug, when or is it spontaneous, like it happens with vestibular neuritis or stroke? We heard about vestibular neuritis doing the head impulse and how a stroke can mimic vestibular neuritis. We heard that on Saturday. Now we come to BPPV. So almost 1 to 6 persons per 1,000 get BPPV every year. So in Mumbai, there will be 200 new cases of BPPV every day. New, I'm saying. And in Pune, there will be about 60. I hardly see 1 or 2 out of these. So you can imagine what must be happening. Many of them settle down on their own, or they take a drug and it goes away in a few days. But many of them keep taking drugs for months and years. The longest I have had is a patient who was taking for 25 years. It is called BPPV, benign paroxysmal, but it should no longer be called benign because the patient has got a lot of disability. There's a lot of fear. Going to happen. It's very scary. An elderly person who was earlier going out and doing shopping and now he doesn't know when he will feel dizzy, their whole life can get changed. So how do you diagnose? First of all, the patient only tells the diagnosis.
काय करता रहती है? उठलं की चक्कर येते. या अंगावर असं चोपलं असं अंगावर तरी चक्कर येते. अंगावर 15-20 मिनिटात चक्कर येते. किती वेळ राहते चक्कर? थोडा टाइम, 1 सेकंद.
You get typically this, then I am willing to diagnose even on the phone. Normally we don't like diagnosis on the phone, but now COVID is going to make us all into telemedicine experts, and BPPV is one condition which you can definitely suspect quite highly on the phone. How do you diagnose BPPV? When the patient describes it, you suspect it, like this patient was telling. But you cannot diagnose it unless you elicit an attack and see the typical nystagmus. So the next question for you is, what is the easiest way to elicit an attack? Do you pray to God? Do you request the patient? Do you do a Dix-Hallpike maneuver, or you call somebody else? I'm going to try the poll once, otherwise we'll let it go. Okay, the easiest way, the second question, easiest way to elicit an attack of, elicit the nystagmus. You pray to God, you request the patient, you do a Dix-Hallpike maneuver, or you do like Amitabh Bachchan and call a friend. Okay, some people are voting. We got 2 people. One is requesting, one is doing a Dix-Hallpike. Okay, Dix-Hallpike 2:1. Okay, we won't waste too much time. Many people think Dix-Hallpike. We'll go back. Okay, so the trick question was, what is the easiest way? The most reliable way is Dix-Hallpike maneuver, but the easiest way is request the patient. The patient has been avoiding that particular movement for months and years. He knows what you do to get vertigo, so he avoids that. So you tell him, "Kai ke lagi chakkar rehte, show me." You are having this to this guy.
डोळे उघडे डोळे मायकडे बघा मायकडे बघा काय होत नाही डोळे उघडा सगळं फिरतंय डॉक्टर काय नाही होत काळजी घेऊ नका एक मिनिट
काय quality
थोडं कमी व्हायला लागलं पण ते हा थोडं कमी झालं कमी
आता परत उठून बसून कमी झालं
झालंय झालं
उठून होतो
so well. So next thing, if the patient history is like BPPV, but you tell him to do it and nothing happens, he says, "nahi, mala kaal aali hoti, aaj nahi yet hai," then you do a Dix-Hallpike maneuver, and everybody knows how the Dix-Hallpike maneuver is to be done. So you turn the head to one side about 45 degrees and take the head hanging down. Be careful, you should not injure the cervical spine or the back. So here you are getting downbeating nystagmus. This is a little different nystagmus. In the earlier patient, we got upbeating torsional. Here we are getting downbeating. The commonest cause of downbeating, earlier we used to think downbeat nystagmus means anterior canal BPPV, but anterior canal BPPV is very rare. So what this lady has is a different type of posterior canal BP. Most of the time, posterior canal BP you get upbeat. But sometimes you get this variety, it's called apogeotropic form of posterior canal BPP, where you get downbeat nystagmus. An easier way sometimes to do in the clinic, instead of getting the patient to hang the head down, we don't have space, or the table is, there is no side place on the side, then you do what is called the side lying test. You just tell the patient, turn the head to one side, fall here, turn the head to the other side, and fall on the other side. And that also is often effective. If it is lateral canal BPPV, then you do what is called a roll maneuver. So the patient is lying down supine and you turn him to lie, turn his head to the
भीतीदायक चक्कर असते इकडे बघा या साईडला
फार बरोबर होतं फार बरोबर
This difference between the lateral and the posterior canal, we'll see it again later, because I'm going to take another talk only on how I manage positional vertigo. So again, how often should these exercises be done for BPP? I haven't put the poll, we'll dispense with the poll. Should you do it never, once a day, thrice a day, only at night, or once a week? And one company has very graciously given these tear out folder things. You just tear it off and give it to the patient and tell him to do that. So a person with BPPV comes and does all these exercises: look up, look down, look to the right, turn the head, etc. Are these the correct exercises? No, this is not the exercise for BPPV. These exercises are for somebody who has unilateral vestibular damage, for example, after vestibular neuritis, or somebody who undergoes ear surgery and his vestibular system is damaged. They require these exercises. These are called the Cooksey-Cawthorn exercises. These are not for BPPV. So BPPV, you have to do the Brand-Daroff exercises. What are they? It's very simple. You ask the patient to sit on the edge of the bed like you did the side lying test, turn the head to one side, fall on the left. Lie down for about 30 seconds, then again come up, again wait for 30 seconds, look to the other side, fall here. So these exercises, you can just Google Brand-Daroff exercise on the YouTube also, and you can give the patient the link and tell them which one to do. Of course, be careful. There are many people who have done Brand-Daroff exercise on the YouTube, and some of them are not correct. Okay, now this again a case. This is a 45-year-old male with positional vertigo. For the last 5 months, 5 months ago, he started losing weight and had anorexia. And then 2 months, he started getting brief attacks of positional vertigo. I've written repositioning into bracket by another neurologist. So what happens is, if somebody does a repositioning, and if the repositioning is successful, then you should not require a single drug. Maybe I give alprazolam 0.25 or 0.5 for 1 or 2 days after repositioning, but no other drug. You should not require a drug. If you require a vestibular suppressant, means your repositioning has failed. So anyway, this person, somebody did a repositioning and gave him drugs and sent him home. The patient was all right for a few days, but then now he's come back with fever and 2 weeks diplopia. And this is
Thank you.
We can't see your finger.
Looking to the right. Looking to the right. Now, can this be BPPV? You saw the lateral canal, they also get, when he lies on the left side, he gets beating to the left, but that is positional. Here you are getting nystagmus at rest. I'm just asking you to look to either side. This is gaze evoked nystagmus. Gaze evoked nystagmus or direction changing nystagmus cannot be due to the ear. It is always central. It can be due to drugs like phenytoin, but it is often due to a brainstem or a cerebellar disorder. And this patient with his fever, with the diplopia, we of course went for an MRI and he had multiple tuberculomas, and the one in the floor of the fourth ventricle was the one responsible for his positional vertigo. Okay, then there is something called subjective BPPV. So the history is exactly like BPPV. They says when I lie down I get dizzy, when I get up I get dizzy, when I turn in bed I get dizzy. But clinically you examine, you do a Dix-Hallpike and it's normal. So it is Dix-Hallpike symptoms might be there sometimes, but no nystagmus is seen. You know my teacher, Dr. Singhal. So one morning he calls me up and he sort of took my viva. So he said, "Hey, Sudhir, if I have a patient who's getting positional vertigo, but I don't see any nystagmus, what would you do?" So I said, "Sir, ideally you should do a VNG. If on VNG also the patient has symptoms and you don't see any nystagmus, then it is not BPPV. But if you don't have a VNG and if you see the patient carefully and you find there is no nystagmus when you're doing the maneuver, whether he has symptoms while doing Dix-Hallpike or not, if you don't see nystagmus, don't accept it as BPPV and do an MRI of the brain." So then sir said, "Why will you do MRI?" So I said, "So sometimes posterior fossa lesion, etc. might be there." And then sir disclosed, this patient came to me with the MRI of a posterior fossa lesion. I wanted to check why the person had done it. So this thing has to be, you have to be very careful. If somebody has BPPV like symptoms, but you don't see nystagmus, don't accept it as BPPV. You do a repositioning maneuver. Sometimes I may do this. Somebody comes with BPPV like symptoms. I try a repositioning maneuver. And if there is immediate relief, you congratulate yourself. If there is no relief, don't give drugs. That is wrong. Then you must check. And here is what you might find. There is a tumor here in the floor of the fourth. It's in the ependymoma probably. Okay, another patient, 82-year-old male, diabetic and hypertensive. He came with acute onset dizziness and oscillopsia. Everything was moving up and down. Clinically, his BP was normal, speech was normal. He had a vertical nystagmus. I'll show you the nystagmus. And he had mildly unsteady gait. There was no history of vomiting, anorexia, or alcoholism. He had not been eating well for a few days. And this is his upbeat side.
ओके ऊपर देखो, यहाँ देखो मेरा उंगली।
This was his MRI. It showed some old ischemic lesions, and a repeat MRI had been done outside by another neurologist. Again, the repeat MRI at 48 hours was also normal. And now he came to me. So what does one do next? I think we'll skip the question answer. What do you do next? You repeat an MRI. You repeat an MRI after 72 hours. And now the repeat MRI shows a small infarct in the pontomedullary region. So what is this 72 hours? You have to remember that in the posterior fossa, small infarcts may not be seen for up to 72 hours. And you have to be sure and do a repeat MRI at 72 hours until. So this patient was treated as stroke and antiplatelet statin. We gave him double antiplatelets only for 3 weeks, mind you. And then he rapidly recovered over the next week. Okay, so MRI can be falsely negative in stroke up to 72 hours. 1/3 cases of posterior fossa strokes or even small lacunes can be missed even on a 3T MRI. It's not a question of the quality of the MRI, it is not seen. So if you suspect it, treat it as stroke and repeat the MRI after 72 hours. If after 72 hours you don't find an infarct, you can stop the antiplatelet. Okay, another patient, 65-year-old man, long-standing migraine, once in a month or so he would get, and he was getting tinnitus and deafness in the left ear for the last 8 months. And now 2 days he started getting brief attacks of positional vertigo, looking up, looking down, lying down in bed, rolling, etc. So if you could do only one test, which one would you do? Positional testing, head impulse, MRI cervical spine, or audiometry? I think I want to do the poll here. Let me see. Okay, so take the third question. Sorry. Would you do Dix-Alpine? This question is confusing. Let's forget it because it's not going to the one. It's not removing the questions which we had taken earlier. So let's forget that. Sorry. Okay, so if you had to do one test, when the person is saying, I get dizzy few seconds when I lie down, when I get up, when I do, whether he's got hearing loss in the past, whether he's got any other history in the past, you must do positional testing. Always make sure you do a Dix-Hallpike maneuver. And here's what we are doing, the sideline test. How the sideline test is done. Just lie down.
चक्कर आएगा तो बोलो.
हाँ शुरू हुआ.
Repeating torsional misdirection, keeping towards the right ear. Right ear.
गया?
Okay. Another case, first attack of vertigo. Female, 55-year-old lady, acute onset vertigo, so last for 24 hours. She had a underlying past history of migraine, no other risk factors. And she came with unidirectional horizontal beating nystagmus, no other neurodeficit. The hearing was also normal. So what would you do? Would you do Dix-Hallpike? Would you do head impulse, MRI with angio, or give anti-vertigo drug and call after it? Remember, she has not got positional vertigo. She's got acute onset continuous vertigo for 24 hours. So here you should not be doing Dix-Hallpike. Yes, MRI with angiogram may be needed if you, depending on what is there, but the first thing that you should do is the head impulse test. And here is one head impulse test. The first
Light
to the right.
लाइट कर दो. लाइट कर straight बोलो तो.
Turn the head to the right, the eyes towards you. So the right side ear is sending proper impulses to the eyes, and see again. When I jerk the head to the right, the eye
लाइट कर दो. लाइट कर दो.
When I jerk the left, the right has got
लाइट कर straight बोलो तो.
left vestibular neuritis, and she doesn't need an MRI or anything. Okay. Another case, I think we're coming towards the end. This is a diabetic and hypertensive. He came with recurrent attacks of brief vertigo lasting 5 minutes. They were not positional, not triggered. There was no diplopia dysarthria. Many times he would get vomiting with these attacks. And initially he was getting them once in a few days, but now started getting more frequently. So if we go to the titrate approach, you are getting, these are non-triggered attacks. So you go down to the list below. Spontaneous. Is there progressive hearing loss, migraine headache, psychiatric symptoms, danger of these, or none? So we've got the fourth one. There's no hearing loss, no history of migraine headaches, and in any case his age is not that of migraine. No question of looking for psychiatric just now. So though he does not have diplopia, dysarthria, or the danger is these, you should think of a stroke. We did his MRI, and he had these multiple infarcts in the posterior fossa, cerebellum, and pons, and he had a severe basilar stenosis, and the vertebral was also on the left not seen well. So despite aspirin and statin, every few hours he was getting these attacks.
लेफ्ट को देखो. लेफ्ट को 5 मिनट हो गया. हाँ. कितना टाइम चक्कर था? उल्टी हुआ. लेफ्ट को देखो, राइट को, ऊपर मेरा उंगली को यहाँ.
Attacks every few hours despite aspirin and the statin, and this was his angio. 24 hours later,
हुआ कुछ नहीं हुआ. लास्ट कब हुआ?
कल शाम से.
उसके बाद नहीं हुआ. ऐसा कर. लेफ्ट को देखो, वो बाजू.
what do you think we did? Did we stent his artery? Did we give carbamazepine? Did we add clopidogrel, LMWH, push up the BP? Did we do a repositioning maneuver, or we added Diamox? So the answer is 3. I'm sure the stroke people will jump on me, but I did give LMWH, but just the single daily dose, like what we give for deep vein thrombosis. I did not give BD, and I did push up the blood pressure to about 140, 150 systolic, because his artery was very tight, and I thought his TIAs were, there was an element of hemodynamic. Anyway, his attack stopped, and he has been following up with me for the last 1 year. He's not had thereafter. I think near the last case, this is a 65-year-old man with old left stroke. No, I think 2 or 3 cases more. Old left stroke. He was on aspirin and telmisartan. And he woke up today feeling dizzy and unsteady, especially on trying to get up and go to the bathroom. So he called up his GP, and the GP immediately sent him for admission. So the CMO was confused. Why has he been sent for admission? The BP was 130/80, pulse was a little high, 110. There was no neurological deficit. And he was feeling dizzy on trying to stand or walk more than a few seconds. So what next? The CMO called me up, should I do an MR angio or a CT angio, or what should we do, or we send for VNG? He didn't know. And we said no. Sudden onset on standing up, he is on aspirin, check his BP supine. So when he checked the standing BP, the BP went down to 90. There was a drop of almost 40 mm. And this patient did have an occult GI bleed. In fact, he got melena only the next day. He required 3 pints of blood, and he had an erosive gastritis on the scopy. So occult GI bleed is a very important cause of postural hypotension, and you may not see any bleeding, you may not see melena. Of course, you won't see the hematemesis if he's not vomiting out. And another situation where the blood loss can be hidden is in the deep muscles. A person who's on anticoagulant can lose blood in his thigh, in the back paraspinal muscles, and you will not see the blood, and yet the person will have postural hypotension. A young boy with recurrent attacks of brief vertigo, 3 days he was getting attacks without tinnitus or deafness. He went to the GP, was given drugs combination, which we nowadays get multiple drugs, and he improved and went for a picnic. And then 3 days later,
चक्कर म्हणजे काय होत होतं?
चक्र म्हणजे असं चालताना तोल जात होता.
कुठल्या बाजूला?
also had
आता उजव्या हाताने कर.
and what he had was a brainstem infarct. So whether it's the age or whatever, if somebody has non-triggered attacks of vertigo lasting for a few minutes, you should think of a TIA. If it's longer, you should think of a stroke. Don't think you are safe just because he's young, there's no hypertension, there's no diabetes or whatever. This guy had a thrombophilic disorder, and that's why he got the stroke. This was an ENT surgeon secretary. 5 years she's been having left hearing loss and attacks of dizziness.
Looking, that's it. So this side, my finger, this side. Keep looking. Where's the finger?
Yeah.
Look here.
Is evoked nystagmus. When she looks to the left, the nystagmus is beating to the left. When she looks to the right, it beats to the right. But the difference is it is asymmetrical. So when she looks to the right,
Look this side. My finger. This side. Keep looking. Where's the finger?
and Brunn's nystagmus suggests a cerebellopontine tumor. With her history of hearing loss, she did have an acoustic neuroma. Another young boy with 1 month of unsteadiness while walking. See his eyes.
बोटाकडे बघ, बोटाकडे. बोटाकडे बघ. हा डोक्यावर हलव. इकडे बघ. बघ तिकडे बघ.
This brain tumor. He had a large pontine glioma, and he was going around taking anti-vertigo drugs for the last 1 month. I think the final case, this is an elderly male with positional headaches after CABG. So he would get headache lasting for a few seconds on lying down wherever the head touched the pillow, but more on the right side. And he would also get headache on standing up or after passing motions.
डोकं टेकलं की उशिरा की जिथे टेकतो आपण तिथे दुखतो.
म्हणजे कुठला भाग दुखतो? हां बर
उजव्या कशावर दुखत की उजव्या कशावर नाही दुखत. डाव्या कशावर येतो की
दुखतं बर
भरायला की दुखतो. म्हणजे झोपेतनं भरायला बसलो.
We did it side
ओके डोळे उघडत हां डोळे उघडा थांबला.
So I have a couple of patients like this who clearly have BPPV. You can see and elicit the attack of nystagmus, and you can cure it also. But when you ask him what is happening, the other guy says, "Doka sun hota hai, I'm getting numb in the head." This guy is saying, "I'm getting headache." They are not saying vertigo. Okay, so the take-home messages are: vertigo can be fun, not for the patient, but for you. Vertigo can be dangerous for both of you. Vertigo is extremely treatable. Never miss BPPV. Learn to reposition BPPV and don't miss a stroke in first time vertigo. You must learn the HINTS battery. We heard about it the other day. Thank you. I think we can't have question. I'm going to do another. I'm sure there will be lots of question answers. We'll do that sometime again. Today, I think I'll stop here. Maybe I'll take a few questions. Where is this? I'll allow people to put up your hands so you can tell me if you want me to continue or okay. If you want me to continue the question answers now or have a question answer session later, those who want the question answers now, just raise your hand. There is something down there. Raise your hand. So I think nobody wants the questions now. We will stop. Those who don't want the questions now, raise your hand. Let me check whether you all are understanding. Both me. Okay. So I think we'll just take a few questions and answers. Let me see if I can do that. Okay, so somebody is saying, what about post-traumatic vertigo for a patient who has it for a long time? Post-traumatic vertigo often is BPPV. The problem is when you get a bang on your head, then a number of particles get released into the canals, and often immediate post-traumatic vertigo, when I see, they often have multiple canals. They have posterior canal, they have lateral canal, they may have bilateral posterior canals, and it is a little difficult and challenging to treat because when you are doing a Dix-Hallpike for the right posterior canal, the same maneuver will bring out the particles from the left one. So it can be you are treating right, and then when you go to treat the left, again the right wala particles come out. So what does one do? What do I do in this situation? I see which is the more symptomatic side and treat that first. Tell the patient to come after 4 days when that side is completely cured. Then I will treat the other canal. Sometimes experimentally, I've tried doing a different maneuver called the Simont maneuver, where you can sort of rapidly reposition the patient, both sides in the same sitting. Vestibular suppressant, somebody is asking how much and how long. I'm the wrong person to ask that because I don't use vestibular suppressants. I just don't use, except vestibular neuritis, I give vestibular suppressants for 3 days. Vestibular neuritis, I treat with steroid, 500 milligrams methylprednisolone intravenously for 3 days. And I give maybe 1 or 2 days, I give vestibular suppressants. The first day when the person is having a lot of vomiting, I may give prochlorperazine and some other drug for 1 or 2 days, but don't continue later. So later, after 3 days, you just stop the vestibular suppressants and do vestibular rehab. We'll see that later. Vestibular rehab is very useful. Okay, then again, somebody is asking, after repositioning for BPPV, do we need to continue beta histine? No, no drugs. You should not require. If you require beta histine, means you have not succeeded in the repositioning. Nowadays, what has happened is, it is looked upon as bad if you send a patient to an ENT and he doesn't do the Epley maneuver. So the ENT will write Epley maneuver done and he'll prescribe beta histine. So that is not correct. If somebody is doing a maneuver properly, the patient will not have any symptom after he goes. He will not have any symptom. And we, in my clinic, what we do is as soon as we do the repositioning, immediately after 5 minutes, we recheck it and see whether it's there or gone. Somebody is asking, Dr. Bhatt is asking me, any role of acetazolamide in migraine-related vertigo? No, I will talk about migraine-related vertigo at some other time. We might have a separate talk on migraine-related vertigo. But migraine-related vertigo, in short, how do you treat? You treat it as you treat migraine. So you may give beta blockers, you may give antidepressants, whatever you use for migraine, you use that. I often find vestibular rehab useful in these patients, and I treat my migraine often. Patients who have bad migraine often need counseling. So you do a three-pronged approach. You give some drugs, beta blocker or antidepressant. I use SSRIs. Again, people will frown upon SSRI use in migraine, but I regularly use SSRIs in migraine and they work for my patients. I also use a psychologist for counseling and it helps the patient. So migraine related vertigo, I treat essentially same as headache, except when a patient has an attack of headache due to migraine, vertiginous, has an attack of headache due to migraine, you give paracetamol or NSAID or whatever naproxen you give for the headache. I do not believe that naproxen is going to treat the vertigo, though some of the specialists say that it helps. No, when somebody has an attack of vertigo due to migraine, I give a vertigo suppressant drug. So SOS, taking a drug for one day is all right, but taking it continuously for months and years is not correct. Somebody is asking, is the modified Epley's maneuver adequate for repositioning? We'll see about repositioning later. Which is the better drug for vertigo, betahistine or cinnarizine? Neither. I don't like drugs, so I feel none of them are good. The problem is their names are so nice that you feel that these drugs, if somebody has got a febrinil, you feel febrinil is a good drug for fever. So like that, the names are made such that you feel they are treating nothing. You are just doing symptomatic therapy. You are suppressing it and you are putting the patient into, as it is, they are scared. So then what happens is even the person feels a little D of the dizziness, he takes the tablet. So we don't want that. You don't want them to become neurotic. Another question, how do you distinguish between posterior canal and lateral? We'll come to that. Central positional, we come to that. A lot of questions on VPPV. So I will take all those when I talk about positional vertigo. Is there anything else? Wait. Multiple canals, okay. Cervicogenic vertigo. So I believe there is no such thing as cervicogenic vertigo. Most of the patients who get vertigo on moving their neck or turning it to one side have BPPV, most of them. Some of them also have vertiginous migraine. Remember, migraine can cause headache, but it can also cause neck pain. So migraine, the common cause of neck pain is also migraine. And often migraine, the neck pain may begin with, the migraine attack may begin with the neck pain and then becomes into a generalized headache. So a person who's having neck pain and dizziness can be migraine, he can be BPPV, but they are almost never cervical spondylosis. Of course, if you do the X-ray, you are going to get spondylosis. GPs giving cervical collar for patient, and if we tell the patient not to use, they don't because they were asked not to remove it. So how to educate it? So one thing I do is I hold the patient's neck like this and then I ask him to lie down and he gets vertigo. Without moving the neck, he's got vertigo. Wearing a collar, he's got vertigo. And then when I repositioning him and whether he moves his neck or not, it's gone. I explain them that your X-ray, if you do now also, is going to show the same amount of spondylosis. Then why has it gone? Branderoff, yes, I exercise. What is the standard medical treatment protocol for BPPV? No medical treatment, should not be giving medicine. You should be doing repositioning maneuvers. If the person has mild BPPV, advise the Branderoff exercise. Don't use drugs. Chronic vertigo after posterior circulation stroke treatment. So somebody has chronic vertigo, you do not have chronic vertigo. What you have is chronic imbalance. When somebody has chronic imbalance, you should treat with vestibular rehab, and we will come to that later. Is there any role of ginkgo biloba, vinpocetine in vertigo? No. If first CRP fails, then when do I repeat it? If I examine a patient and while examining he's got typical BPPV and I cannot reposition it, I tried 2-3 times, sometimes I can't do it and my assistant does it better than me. But if we just cannot, then we call the patient back after a day or two. And I am going to talk about various maneuvers and show them later. I think we'll stop here. Are Frenzel lenses useful? Very useful. Video nystagmography is very useful, and you cannot really treat vertigo without these. I think that as neurologists, we are used to using the EEG, which often is not that useful. EEG is done in so many patients where it's not really contributing anything. You know, he's got IG, you know the person has got juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, you know a febrile seizure doesn't need EEG, but we are used to buying an EEG and doing EEGs. We are not used to a video nystagmogram, though it is probably cheaper and it is going to help all your patients who complain of dizziness. Next time when you go to your OPD, see how many patients complain of dizziness. At least 20% of them will have dizziness, and it's very useful. So I will stop here and we'll take some questions again later, maybe just a question answer session where you also can talk, and we'll have that sort of session, because this just now is I'm feeling like Man Ki Baat. Okay, thank you everybody.